Hello, and welcome to the Way of the Illuminated Warrior Global Interview Summit Series. My name is Perry Finkelstein, also known as Waska, and I'm really excited to be hosting this series of mindful experts who have the intention to share with you their experiences, their wisdom, and their stories and knowledge to help you find balance, love, and all the good things that we're all looking for. And today is going to be really excellent. We're going to be talking about love relationships. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce today's guests. Neil Sattin is the host of the popular podcast Relationship Alive, where he talks to the world's experts on the topic of how to do love right. He's also a relationship coach trained in strategic intervention and consciousness uncoupling, a writer, and an infinity practitioner with over 15 years experience in the field of relationship coaching and healing. Chloe Urban is a certified infinity practitioner who works with clients all over the world, along with trainings in infinity healing, shamanism, relationship healing, and coaching modalities. Chloe is a skilled consciousness dance facilitator and artist. She was raised with the medicine wheel teachings and has spent years steeped in ancient wisdom through journeys, ceremony, and connecting with the earth. Together, they're beautiful. Chloe and Neil are co-founders of the New Love Paradigm and are authors of the forthcoming book for helping couples experience fulfilling and joyful intimacy when they are affected by sexual trauma. Along with their flagship 7-week online relationship course called Thriving Intimacy, they also produce a course for dailyom.com called 21 Days of Deeper Intimacy that has been taken by more than 2,500 people, I'm one of them, looking to improve their relationships. So without further ado, I want to welcome Chloe and Neil.
Thanks for having us.
So great to be here with you, Perry.
Yes. And I can't resist, I have to say, because my father always said it, thanks for being had. Yeah, may he rest in peace. So anyway, this is awesome. Like I said, I took your course and that's how I became familiar with you. And I love you guys, really. I love what you do. I love what you put out there. And that's why I wanted to share your wisdom and your stories and your suggestions to the audience on really what is love, what is healthy love. And so we'll start off with what is this new love paradigm that that you write about, that you talk about?
Great question.
And whoever wants to answer, you guys, you're a couple, you're a partner, you got it together. So I'll leave that up to you.
We're pretty good at flowing back and forth. So we started the New Love Paradigm, which is sort of the umbrella business of our work together and our courses. And we named it that partly because it was really stepping into a new way of loving, a whole new paradigm of how to do relationship in a way that is fulfilling, but also helps us grow and go deeper within ourselves and to really step into a new way of relating, which I think, being in this time in human evolution is pretty important because our brains are changing, our relationships are changing. It's not just about security and having a roof over our heads. It's really like, how do we actually connect and do this thing called intimacy in a way that is fulfilling? And so we've really been building our work around that. I'm gonna add.
Yeah, and I think it also came out of our own journey together and with our clients, realizing how even with all of the right tools for relationship, that there was still something missing for us, something that was making it challenging for us to integrate everything that we were learning about how to do relationship well, but to actually make it practical in our lives and to actually have it become something that we fully embodied together. And of course, that is always a journey because a relationship is always evolving, and we're no different in that regard. But at the same time, that was part of why I guess we're so presumptuous as to call it the New Love Paradigm, because for us, it represented that shift in jumping into a new level of integration, a new level of awareness, and being willing to see relationship on all these different levels. There's, of course, the relational level, emotions, how you think with your partner, how you are physically, like your sexuality, your intimacy. But then there's also like, what do you bring energetically to your relationship? What do you bring in terms of your sense of spirit to your relationship? What are the legacies that you're bringing in? And how do you make that all real in the present moment so that it's actually practical?
Yeah.
You know,
Great
we wanted
point.
to not just be lost in consciousness, but we wanted to be really real in the moment with each other and with the people that we've worked with as well.
Yeah, those are some really great points. So being in the moment and being conscious, I think that's really key because you know, from what I've seen in my own relationships and other relationships that I've observed, that is like really so important, because if you're not in the moment, if you're not like conscious and present, I'll say more present, I think that's really when things start to go awry, because we all want to feel cherished. We all want to feel loved. We all want to feel like we're being paid attention to. So yeah, that's a really, really big key point. Yeah. And you mentioned connection, you mentioned intimacy. And I'm going to ask you, because I think it's really important and not to be taken for granted, if you could make some suggestions, how could especially the guys, how could they create some intimacy in their relationships that maybe they don't really even know what to do? Because we really, as men, we're not really bred that way. We don't learn that usually from our dads, from really anyone. So if you could speak to that, that would be great.
Yeah.
Well, for one thing, that point that you just made about how we don't necessarily learn intimacy, and in particular that obstacle to feeling an intimate connection with men, and so and how important that is, I just think that's crucial. So I'm glad that you brought up that that's a deficit, and I think it's worth shining a little bit of attention on it, because one important aspect of getting more intimacy in your relationship is broadening your definition of intimacy so that it in and of itself is a little bit more well-rounded. You know, basically, if all you're looking for is to get laid more, then that kind of one-dimensional approach isn't going to last long in the context of a well-rounded, fulfilling relationship. And a lot of the time, you know, when sex starts to falter in a relationship, I mean, it's good to notice that, because that is an indication of something happening. But so often our tendency is to just be like, well, we're not having as much sex as we used to, so let's fix that. Like, how do we have more sex? And in asking that question, missing the deeper implications of how do you actually really build a container of deep intimacy where fulfilling sex is just one aspect of that. So I think that is really probably the first step for anyone, no matter your gender, is to have an expanded sense of what it means to be intimate, so that you're able to build in all these different ways. And also, I think that gives you some sense of gratitude and abundance, because it may be that in a particular moment in time, you're not having a lot of sexual intimacy, but you are having a lot of emotional intimacy, or you are having intellectual intimacy, or you actually are having a lot of closeness. You're just not having a lot of, you know, interconnected closeness. So the bigger your view, the more it sets you up to be in a sense of like, oh, there's actually a lot happening here. And when you start to shine light and amplify what you do have, then the things that you have less of, it's easier for them to kind of follow along in the wake of that, versus like shining all your attention on what you feel like you're missing, and then you don't get the benefit of the momentum of the things that are going right in your relationship.
Hmm.
Well said.
Yeah, I definitely want to hear what you have to say about that also, Chloe. And if you could also speak to the point that I think we could all agree that men and women think very differently on a lot of these points and feel very differently. So I'm really, curious about your perspective, Chloe, how especially the sex part, because we're getting into that now. So yeah, I'd love to hear.
Absolutely. It's so interesting just to hear the answer and then be like, oh, interesting, I would have answered it this way, and so here we are. And I love what Neil was saying, and I'd love to touch in on the sex part too from a woman's perspective. The first thing that came to my mind when you asked about, like, well, we're not really taught intimacy, like, what is that for men in particular? What is that? To me, the first word that came into my mind is vulnerability, and the willingness to just be in your vulnerability, to allow yourself to really be seen, whether there's pain underneath or not, or like whatever's there, just being an open book, which I think isn't taught. So how do we truly just be present, be transparent, be there and willing to show what's underneath, to truly be authentic to who we are, to be honest when something doesn't feel quite right, without it being about the other person or projecting a bunch of stuff in it and say attacking or getting frustrated. Our dog really wants to be a part of this conversation. So to me, that is like a key word, a key experience, is to really be willing to show up in your vulnerability and to be transparent. And I think that actually comes right along with, to me, also one of the key pieces for me in actually having a fulfilling relationship is the willingness to be humble. So to be in my humility, to be willing to own, oh my goodness, I did just project that, or wow, that came off as an edgy judgment. Like, I'm really actually really sorry, instead of getting all defensive and trying not to own what's going on within me, even though that's the thing that's creating the disconnection. And it's really tends to be the times when we don't want to be humble and we don't want to own and we want to blame or shame or whatever, that those are the places where we're actually hiding from being vulnerable. So there's just this really interesting dance that if you can really step in, and I mean, I'm talking like, sometimes I have to, like, almost, it feels like I have to grit my teeth and like, okay, I'm going to fight through and I'm going to be humble here, even though I want to run away and I want to blame and I want to just throw a little hissy fit. And it's like, no, I actually have to push through, and I have to choose in a moment that might be challenging. I have to choose to be vulnerable. I have to choose to be humble. I have to choose to own my shit. I have to choose to show up, because if we really are choosing a relationship that we want long term and that we want to be fulfilling and connecting, that's what's required. There's no way we can just, like, hide ourselves and hide what's going on and blame and shame and it really last. So that is one piece I just wanted to bring in around intimacy in general. It could be sexual too, but the non-sexual part of it. And then with sexuality, I mean, it's such a huge topic. Another place where we really do not have education, where we aren't trained. And, I'm just thinking of the younger men that might be listening to me. I think it's pretty obvious in our time right now in history that consent is huge. And so to me, it's like, how do we flow in and out of the edges of the pieces that might be like, oh wow, it might feel awkward for me to say ask right now if I could do something. But in fact, like, if we really get into this flow of curiosity and consent really, and being a yes to the moment, then we both get to relax and we both get to surrender over to the intimacy, to the connection, to the love that can birth when both people are on board, instead of if just one person's, you know, going in as a yes and another person's actually like energetically a no in themselves, they're shutting down. And that's not going to create a safe, intimate container. It's going to be one-sided, and it's going to be, well, it could be a lot of things, but it's not creating that safety, that container that allows for intimacy to really blossom.
Great points. Both of you have some really great points there. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's I find it really interesting. Like you spoke about authenticity, which a lot of times, you know, again, I know the way I was raised, and from all the men and boys that I've worked with, because we're really not trained how to feel comfortable in our own skin in relationships. A lot of times we follow what we think we're supposed to be doing, and the paradigm of, you know, be a man, and, you know, like Neil was saying, oh, you know, getting laid and all that. I from a very young age, I was always very sensitive, and, you know, I was never really like a player or into that. So I find it really difficult sometimes. Like even, you know, some of my, you know, close friends, they're just, I know they're not even like that, but they talk like that. I'm like, guys, come on, really? Like, have some. It's so disrespectful. It's disrespectful not only to women, but it's disrespectful to yourself. And it's. I don't think it's authentic. So I'm really. That's why I'm psyched that you guys are on. Just really finding ways and suggestions for men and boys to like stand up and be authentic and speak your truth, but, you know, speak it in a loving, compassionate way. And you don't have to go along with all the other guys, you know, because they're not being honorable and they're not doing the right thing. So, and the sexual thing, yeah, if it's not consensual, I mean, honestly, I have to say, it blows me away. I realized, but not to the degree. I was at a seminar recently. There was over 2,000 people there, mostly women. And, you know, I posed this, but I didn't ask them to stand up. But a lot of them came up to me afterwards, the women. Like, men could pretty much go anywhere in the world, and we could feel primarily safe, yeah, and not really have to worry about being abused sexually, you know, verbally, emotionally, as women do. And now, if I would have asked those women to stand up or raise your hand or whatever, how many of you in this room have been or not been sexually, physically, verbally? I mean, pretty much the only ones who wouldn't acknowledge it are the ones who are just not ready to do that. And it blows me away that we as men, we could walk the earth and we could get away with what we do. And I say we because as conscious men, we have to stand as illuminated warriors and protect our women and do the right thing by them and do what we're really here to do. That's to me anyway, that's the cohesion and the unity and the unison of being a man. So yeah, that's my little rant for today.
Oh, it's beautifully said, and so it blows me away too that that's just the way it is. And I mean, I'm like, Neil, you got to walk the dog at night. We live in a city, and I'm like, I don't actually feel 100% safe to just walk my dog at night, you know. And it's like the simplest thing, and yet there are so many places where it's like it's in the background for women all the time, and just raising more and more men to step in and show up and not only show up and not do things, but actually step in if needed, you know, and say something if their friend or even someone on the street they see. Like, there's a way in which it really is a shifting of a paradigm that's long overdue to be shifted. So
yeah, the new love paradigm.
The new love paradigm.
Yeah. Well, I raised 3 boys, so I'm very sensitive to it. And I never had a girl, but I could imagine being a man, what that would be like. So I want to ask you, Neil, because you have a son and a daughter, yeah, what goes through your mind? Because you know how men are. So you have, on one hand, you have a son that obviously you want to raise in a certain way, and you have a daughter who I'm sure you have concerns about being out there with men who are not awake and aware. So if you could speak to that a little bit, I would love it.
Yeah, well, on some level, I've had the luxury, or we've had the luxury with them, of them being younger, and we've prioritized preserving their innocence as much as possible. And we're actually right now, I think, entering a transition time with them where it is going to be more about talking about those aspects of being out in the world. And so in some ways it hasn't fully come up yet, or we've generalized into bigger lessons about being kind, being respectful, what it means to have someone's consent or not. And, you know, those kind of issues come up all the time. Like, don't hit your brother, don't hit your sister. Like, did you have their consent to blah, blah, blah. Like, that's, you know, so that's really how it's come up. What I anticipate though, and I don't fully know the answer to this yet. In fact, this will probably end up coming up on my podcast because it's important, and there are other people who have thought through this a lot more than we have. But I do think it's important to ponder how we introduce ideas about sexuality to them in ways that already have imbued notions of consent, notions of how it's okay to be scared or to not know. And to, I think that's part of the vulnerability that Chloe, you were just talking about, is that willingness to be a little bit like in the uncertainty of the moments, especially when you're naked, right? Like there's some uncertain moments there. Not if you're just following the script that someone has handed you.
Right.
And let's be clear that the script that society has around sexual dynamics has, I mean, it's clearly dysfunctional in a lot of ways, but what it does have is it taps people into the dynamics, let's say, of power, which is why we're talking about power discrepancies. But it taps in a way that actually is very alluring to people. There's like when you're on the top of that dynamic, or you feel like you are, then there's a lot of dopamine and adrenaline and endorphins that feel good and might make you feel like, well, that's the way it's supposed to be because that feels good to me. So part of it is shifting people in a new level of experience that gives them equally as good, if not better, feelings, which all has to do with vulnerability and what it feels like to fully be seen and to see, and the juice and excitement that creates, which is like worlds beyond the charge of chemistry that people often are going on when they first connect with another person. So, so that's where I hope to shift them towards is feeling that connection between their authentic selves, and then how that really permeates all those dimensions of how they show up with other people.
Beautiful. Yeah. There's been studies, and again, I heard these studies, so I talked to a lot of the guys just for my own edification. All like you first, there's usually chemical attraction in couples and all, and after 2 years, they say like the honeymoon starts to kind of wane and all, and it's interesting because I think it is true because I've done my own little research from people I know and my own relationships and all. So that being said, whether it's true in every case, which I'm sure it's not true in every case, obviously you're a perfect example of that. What suggestions could you make to the viewers that whether it wanes or not, how do you keep that intimacy? How do you keep that love? How do you keep that connection? How do you keep it going? Because I don't think anybody really truly gets together, or anybody with a healthy mindset of relationships and love gets together thinking like, oh, you know, I want to break up on this such and such a date, or I want to get divorced, or I want to have a unsuccessful relationship. So what can you suggest, you know, to the viewers to do?
It's a really, really great question. And Neil touched a bit upon the dopamine kind of adrenaline circuit. And a lot of our work with couples is all about actually feeding the oxytocin circuit, which is the bonding molecule. It gives you the beautiful feelings of connection and intimacy and love. But dopamine, when you're really on the dopamine kick of the new love and the, oh, I just can't get enough of you, and like you could have sex anywhere, it's just like, I just want you, and then that starts to die off. It's really like, how do we actually, I don't want to just get into the chemical components, but it is true, like our brains are a huge part of this. And so to actually do things that build the oxytocin circuit between you. So there are plenty of ways to do that. Anywhere from hugging each other creates oxytocin. When you're actually being sexual, there's practices where you're not actually having orgasms, but it's more about the connection before. It's about creating intimacy, connection, pleasure, being on the ride without it being about the dopamine drive of an orgasm, which, they've done so many studies about couples who, say they go away and they have sex a bunch. They actually end up getting like more critical and butting heads a lot more. It's a way in which once the dopamine hits and then goes away, it's not about bonding. It's about spreading your seed and leaving, basically. I mean, it's true. And so as we move forward, it's like, how do we actually, whether you want to practice non-orgasmic sex or not, but there's a way in which you can do things, as I said, hugging, laughing together, cuddling, or just holding hands when you're walking down the street. What for me and Neil, I think a huge part of what it is that we do to continue to stay connected is just doing those things. We're in the kitchen, we give each other a hug, and maybe we kiss for a moment or two. We're holding hands when we're walking down the street. We're creating connection all the time that's creating that oxytocin between us. So that, I think, is one key component. There's so many that I'm like, okay, and now we can go here and there. Do you want to just add to what I was just saying, or anything you wanted to add?
Yeah. And I think an important flavor of what Chloe was just saying is that the dopamine cycle by its nature is unsustainable.
Right.
You need more and more stimulation, and it's the exact same cycle that feeds really any addiction.
Right.
So you habituate, you need more and more stimulation to even receive the same level of high and feel goodness. And so it can't last, or you're sort of chasing that high, you're chasing after novelty,
right.
and that's exhausting too. The ways that Chloe was suggesting of fostering oxytocin, that's actually a biochemical circuit that is sustainable,
right.
where you don't habituate, and the more you give it, the more it grows.
Right. It's a totally different way of being in relationship.
Exactly. So I feel like it's important for people to just recognize on some level that if they're experiencing that, like, oh, it was 2 years and now things feel dull, and to be clear, that can be 6 months too. It's
right.
not always even 2 years. Then that's normal. It's normal for that to happen.
It doesn't mean that there's something wrong with your relationship. It just means there's a new chapter you're stepping into.
Yeah.
Right. And so the question becomes, how do you foster those things, those ways of interacting that are more sustainable? So right. Chloe was offering some great ideas. And then the other thing that popped into my mind that's sort of an expansion of one of the first things that I mentioned is we talk about the continuum of
right.
Intimacy or sexuality. And it's basically this awareness that at all times we are on this continuum. Mm-hmm. So if you have like an on-off kind of model of intimacy,
right.
then if you're not on, which might be like naked in bed, like doing each other, then you're off, right?
He's so romantic.
Doing each other.
Right, we're staring into each other's eyes.
There you go.
The cosmos. So the point being that in reality, at any moment, you are somewhere on that continuum. And that's why taking a moment in the kitchen to simply hold each other and look into each other's eyes for 30 seconds, not only is that literally fostering the biochemicals of connection, but it's also creating this psychological acknowledgement of like, we're still on this ride together.
Right.
The ride hasn't ended. We're not like waiting for the next, like, we're not standing in line and waiting
for the roller coaster
to begin. We're actually still enjoying that. We're someplace on that. And I think that's also helpful if you are in a place where you feel like you're experiencing lack, as a way of shifting your mindset to like, oh wait, I'm not actually experiencing lack. I'm experiencing something. And, the best improvisation is about acknowledging what's real, what's there, and being a yes to it, and then seeing where you go. And that gets right into the consent thing that Chloe was talking about too, where it's like both people need to be a yes. And when you figure out like, oh, we can both be a yes to this, we can both be a yes to standing in the kitchen holding each other, then you can be like, all right, well, where do we go from here? As opposed to like, wow, honey, you look good, let's go to the bedroom. Like that's a huge leap in, especially when you're out of the honeymoon stage.
Right.
Yeah, great points, really great points. So I think what I'm hearing is, which I would attest to, if you want to say that it takes work, it takes a consistent, ongoing effort. If you want to stay in that place that doesn't just evaporate, and you want to have that connection, then it really does take some effort, and takes those moments to say, hey, like you're saying, look into each other's eyes, or hug each other, or just spend some time and just be present. Really makes a huge difference. So yeah, wonderful points.
Yeah. Can I just say, before we continue, I'm just cluing into the language there, and there's this sense of like, you had mentioned staying, like staying in that flow of love. And to me, it's really important for us to recognize that it's not a staying, it's a continuation of a journey. It's actually a going beyond or transcending. And I think that's why so many people, when things start to falter 2 years in, let's say, they feel like something's wrong. We either got to reclaim that thing that we had, or, wow, I'm starting to feel that feeling with someone new, at the office or the coffee shop or whatever. Like maybe that's where I should go.
Great point.
They never actually get to experience what comes next. And what comes next is so much better. And it's not the result of chasing what you used to have. It's the result of opening into something even more. Like the blessing of what you had, it got you into this place where you could have each other. And now you got to do something with that. And that's where you get to the next place.
Yeah.
Thank you for adding that, Neil. That is such a vital, beautiful point. That thank you. Because I think, I can't think for anybody else, but from my experiences, my own experiences, and what I've heard numerous times from the guys, I don't think a lot of us really know that. I don't really think that we know that. So I'm really happy that you brought that up. That the journey is very different than maybe what we think it is, and it's better by putting the effort in, because it's not sustainable. And I used to hear that and be like, wow, that sucks. Well, it doesn't suck. It's the reality. And not only doesn't it suck, it could be better. So I love that you're both really saying that and supporting that, because it's something that I think we all need to know, that it can be even better once this initial thing evaporates. And no, you're right. We don't need to stay in that. We need to evolve, and we need to bring it up to the next level, which you're saying is better. So excellent. I love that you are so in love. It's beautiful.
Well, and the thing is that, as he was talking, I'm like, two things. Growth like, you really have to be willing to grow if you want to be in a connected, conscious relationship, period. Like, it takes a willingness. We could be 30 years into a relationship and kind of be numb, and neither one of us are very happy, but we've stayed the course. Or it's like, how do you actually step in and say, oh, I'm actually really willing to do my work, my own growth. I'm willing to look at where my wounds are getting in the way of us connecting. I'm willing to, just dive deep. There's so many things we've had to do that with. And, when trauma weaves into a sexual circuit, that has also been a huge piece for us. And yet, how do you, evolve that and just go for it and step in? And that, I think, is what people are like, oh, I don't want to have to work on myself. And yet it's like, let me tell you, I am way more in love. Like, I swear to God, every week we're kind of like, oh my God, I just love you so much. Like, I can't even imagine that I could have gotten here. Like, I didn't know this was possible because this piece wasn't a part of that journey yet. Like, we're always evolving. We're always uncovering that next, like, nugget of healing and growth. So I'm not the same person I was when I met Neil. And what a gift that is, because now we get to be like, oh my gosh, I've evolved, I've changed, I've shifted. And our intent has really been to do that growing together so that we can just discover each other over and over again in a way different way. And I'm for sure more wildly in love with this man than when I met him.
Beautiful. And I love the fact that you say that, which is something not to be taken for granted either, to tell each other that you love each other, which, listening to you, brings up I think a really important point. So you said relationships really need to grow. We need to grow our relationship, and we all grow individually on our own path. So let me ask, both of you, because we do grow at our own pace in our own ways. And also, what happens when you're growing and he's not, or he's growing, and you're growing at different speeds and different ways and different directions? How do you, when you're not necessarily feeling like you're connecting like the roots of a tree, but like you're branching out in different directions, how do you support that love relationship when that kind of thing happens, which does happen quite often, I'm sure?
Absolutely. That's a great question. Do you want me to go first and you go, or you?
Are you feeling inspired?
I'm feeling inspired.
All right.
I'm feeling the love.
I'm feeling the love. I'll keep it short so you can go, because I was just talking about a bunch. But well, the first thing that came up for me around that point is we both, as I was just saying, like, growth and healing, it's just a part of our life. It's what we've chosen. It's what fires us up. It's what we love. So that, thankfully, is there for both of us. I know some couples, it's like one person is a growth junkie and the other is just like doesn't want to look at themselves. And I think it's a possibility that something like that could work, and you might not get to the level of intimacy and connection we're talking about if there is that block to actually being willing to look at your own stuff. That being said, I think there's been really interesting flows in our journey. It might be that, I'm in this huge growth curve and I'm actually like, oh, all these things are coming together. And I had this awareness about, some childhood trauma or my sexual trauma history and it just starts to bubble up. And, I feel like we all kind of know that feeling, those of us that are in this world of healing and consciousness and growth. It's like, in transformation, there are these places when it's just this huge wave of growth. And I've found myself like, oh my gosh, I don't know if I can bust through this doorway because I might leave Neil behind, or like, what if I'm like way here and he's not quite there yet, or vice versa. And I've found over and over again that when I bust through, it almost just, because we're connected, we're all interconnected, all of us, and especially like a family unit. I feel that when you know, I'm just using me as an example because here I am and I'm talking. Like when I step into a new awareness, a new way of seeing, or a dismantling of an old pattern, it shifts the whole family dynamic. And then, you know, Neil might get on board and have a whole nother awareness that weaves in, and it just becomes this beautiful experience, even though it might take him a few weeks to catch up, or me a few weeks to catch up to him. And yet it is this, it just naturally happens because we are all so interconnected. And, you know, having a community of healers that we work with a lot, it's just amazing to see when one chooses something, the whole group changes. I mean, someone, you know, I've seen people go in for surgery and, you know, have to go in and go through this huge thing, and it actually has impacted the whole group. So I just want to bring in that sense of like, we're all interconnected. It's all happening, and the growth is instigating more growth all the time, even if you're not quite seeing it, or you're afraid you might leave somebody behind. I have a lot more to say, but you go for it. Because I know I could talk forever and ever.
Yeah, well, we like stuff, right? What occurred to me was that, like, as we're listing out the things that are normal to experience in relationship, it would be normal for when one person grows and the other person hasn't grown yet, or hasn't adjusted or acclimated to the change. It's normal for that to be painful and to create tension in the relationship. And so it's not always easeful. And in the case of relationships where one person seems to be more growth oriented, then it can be particularly painful. So the backdrop of all the growth and change that, yes, we would be doing anyway, but particularly in the context of a relationship, is creating a fierce backdrop of safety with each other. So that even when we're in a moment of tension, even when we're feeling like the influence of an inner shadow part that just like hates the other person because of the change that is happening.
You mean I have to now adjust? This is really uncomfortable.
Yeah, exactly. So even when that's happening, there's a larger framework of like, we've prioritized safety for our relationship and not jeopardizing it. And even when things are edgy or challenge it, we prioritize the safety. And so that's one, I think, how that whole thing is sustainable, of growing and growing at different paces. And also, I think in partnerships where one person does feel a little bit more growth oriented, that it could be that their partner isn't feeling safe enough to grow, or safe enough to accept a change that their partner is going through. So in most of those situations, there's a lot that's possible when the spotlight is shown on how do we actually shore up our safety with each other, because that is the kind of thing that can ignite growth in an otherwise stuck partner, or can create connection where they're feeling a little disconnected from each other. And if I think back to times where we've felt more tension around growth, when we remember to be like, all right, wait a minute, like, we're not feeling safe right now.
Right.
What do we need to do to get back to safety? Then we settle back into that, and then we grow from there.
Yeah.
Nice, beautiful. And I have to point this out because it may not be obvious to everybody, which I think is, and I think you'll agree, is like really vital in any good, healthy relationship. One of you is speaking, the other one has total, attention to the other one. You're looking at each other. You're not interrupting each other. You're being present and in the moment with each other. You're supporting what each other's saying. And this is the way you are. I know this is the way you are all the time, which is not necessarily, I'm not going to name names, but there was a couple that we used to hang out with, that they would come, and after we said hello, come on in, that the only other thing we said was, okay, goodbye and thanks for going, because and the two of them were just, you know. So I think it's really important to acknowledge you guys for that you are so present with each other, and you're very respectful and in the moment, and it's you know, it's beautiful, really.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Can I add one thing? I was just reminded of one of our wedding vows is actually about the very topic we were talking about, which is really like, I vow to support you no matter what in your own personal, you know, growth and transformation. And I will do my absolute best to be on my own journey of growth and transformation as well. That's not exactly what it said, but basically that gist of just really, and then, you know, we had a vow about safety. So it's like, all of it's just like woven in, and like, okay, what could a relationship look like if that was what you were upholding as your vows together, as what you're stepping into? And I think, you know, we had a beautiful way of being able to sit down and write vows, but even if you're dating, like, to actually become more explicit, like have the conversations. In fact, one of the first things we have people do in our courses is like, have the conversation. Like, what are your agreements? You know, so many people, it's like, oh wait, I didn't even know that was a possibility, because in my mind that was an agreement. Who was it? You that was telling me, like, somebody recently, I just heard this thing where there was a couple and a man went out and got a mistress one night. Like, he hired a prostitute and like came home, and, you know, his wife asked like where he was, and he was like, oh, I hired a prostitute last night and but I just hadn't felt like we were connecting sexually, and I just, you know, wanted a little connection. And she was like, wait, what? And he was from a country that, like, that was just totally fine. And like his family, all the men, it was just like, in that culture, that's just what you did. It wasn't even like a thing to be talked about. That's just what men did. Now, this is a very extreme example, but it's just so interesting to be like, I mean, this could be on a smaller scale. Like, are we agreeing to watch porn or not? Or are we agreeing that we're going to try and be kind to one another? Like, it can be very small agreements and very big, but to actually be more transparent at the beginning of a relationship. And it allows for you to get more clear on, like, what are the growth pieces here? What are we actually agreeing to together? And then you don't get blindsided by things that are just assumed are there. So
having those conversations, you're saying.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Have them. They can be uncomfortable, but it can build the safety to the point where you're just like, oh, I know that this is what my partner is agreeing to, and I know this is what I'm agreeing to, and it creates so much more space for each person to grow and shift and change, knowing that the foundation is already talked about.
Great. All right, so you talked about safety, prostitutes, and porn.
I know.
So that's okay. What comes to mind, something else that came up, which I really want you guys to touch upon, because I know it's a large part of your work, is trauma. You know, how do we get past those sexual traumas and still stay authentic, and still stay trusting, and still be open to having a safe and healthy relationship? How?
Yeah, great question. And it's funny that I brought that up, because I feel like that is all in that same sort of circuit, right? The trauma circuit is all woven into all of it that I was just talking about. But yes, it's huge. And as we were just talking earlier, like, I mean, there are men that are affected, and there are a lot of women. In fact, I don't know if I've ever been with a partner that hasn't been with, like, most of their other partners have had some sort of trauma. So it's pervasive. It's something we just absolutely have to be addressing more. For me, I'm the one who's had the sexual trauma in a bigger way. We call them big T and little T traumas. I'm sort of the big T trauma person in the partnership, and Neil's more of the little T trauma. Not to diminish, and yet. So anyways, it's been a journey, and it's oh my goodness. I mean, there are so many things that we've had to weave in to the experience. And sometimes it's really challenging to show up for it. You know, for the partner, like, how do I not take this personally? How do I not be just like walking on eggshells because I'm afraid I'm going to trigger my partner's old trauma? How do I, you know, do all these things and actually still stay open and present and here? And for me, same thing, like, how do I stay present, and how do I let myself really let my brain know that in this moment I'm actually safe, and continually, like, I mean, I have tools to help my brain relax, and yet there's a lot of just like, okay, how do I stay present in this moment? How do I let my inner younger parts that were traumatized, like my inner child or whatever, that has this relationship to sex that was not safe, how do I let her know that in this moment I am safe with this man, I am safe, and breathe through and just step into, okay, I can do this. Like, my body might be, you know, reacting in certain ways, and how do we create the safety again to show up? Like, how do I know, like, in any moment I could say, ooh, I'm actually a no to this. I'm actually, like, I can't have you touch me like this, but what if we tried this? And then having the openness on the other side to receive that, and not have it be about being personal, but how do then it's like, oh, okay, great. And staying in the curiosity together, and like, what does feel good? What doesn't feel good? What might be triggering in this moment isn't going to be triggering in 20 minutes. So how do we, you know, just be willing to be in the journey, even if it's bumpy, to be willing to talk. I think so many people, and they're in the sexual act, and it's like, oh gosh, now I'm in, and I'm not, like, I can't talk, I can't speak up, like, that's going to be awkward. Like, just be willing to talk, be willing to be awkward, be willing to, you know, be in the flow of it. Even if, like, there might be a moment where, oh, the talking actually kind of takes us out of that, like, passionate moment or whatever, and yet, great. It gives us that opportunity to be in curiosity, like, oh, how do we find our way back into that flow without just, like, losing all of it? And there's so much to talk about. I just got kind of going, but I know you have things to say. I'll add more if
you think I have something to say here.
I mean, it's like, well, an entire book's probably 5 books worth of stuff that we've been really practicing. So
what I love too is, you know, Perry, you mentioned earlier just that your observation of, like, how we're really listening to each other and giving each other space to talk. And I think that it's worth pointing out that what that means sometimes is that you have to let go of what you thought you were going to say. Right. Because I thought I was going to say something totally different, but in being really present to what Chloe was saying, like, now I have something else to say that actually hopefully will add to what she just said. And that makes for, I think, good conversation, good listening, good connection, and that willingness. If you're just, like,
holding on to the story that you want to tell, then you're not being present.
Exactly.
So it's a beautiful little.
So when you were talking along those lines, I was thinking about how when trauma enters the space, how if you're not going to be willing to accept what's happening in the moment and go there, which is what Chloe was talking about, like, how do we just be present to what just happened and show up for that? Then what people tend to do is either dissociate in some way. So you deny that that's happening and you're just going to get lost in the moment, or they tighten down, which is kind of resisting what's happening. And either one can actually amplify the pain or the disconnection, which are the, like, when people are thinking about trauma, it's like, yeah, something comes up, it triggers me, and I'm not there anymore. I'm not enjoying. And so that's a factor of either, like, fleeing the scene, dissociating, fantasizing, or clenching down and fighting. So fight or flight is basically what I'm saying. So this does come back to the safety and the willingness to be vulnerable. So our recurring themes in today's conversation, because there's all this fear that if you acknowledge what's happening, that you'll lose the possibility to connect.
Right.
And especially, I think that happens a lot in couples that are dealing with trauma, where it can feel like, oh, we're so lucky, we're finally here. And like, I don't want to lose that. So I don't want to address what just happened, or the way that my body is shutting down, or even, you know, the way I'm feeling rejected right now, you know, like all of those things can come up.
Yeah.
Being willing to actually slow down and notice what's happening in yourself, notice what's happening in your partner, and to be able to trust each other that, oh, if we just like embrace this moment, even if it's like a painful moment or if it's a scary moment, that there's something on the other side of that. If we stay connected through it, this is why partnership is so beautiful, because you allow, among many reasons, one of them is that you really fortify each other when it's time to navigate something challenging. So if you're willing to be there and be present through all of that, and that involves acknowledging the times when it might be like, oh, you're bringing up something super painful for me, and I don't know, I'm confused. Like, I don't know how to hold this space because of this trauma or whatever it is. But being willing to be there too, it's a moment of mystery and faith. But when you're able to be there, and it's so funny to be using, like, I mean, those are very religious, spiritual terms, right? Mystery and faith. But to be willing to be there in a moment where trauma rears its head is what allows you, again, to get to the other side of that experience.
Yeah. Wow. You guys are filled with a lot of really beautiful wisdom and all. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for elaborating on that. We could be talking for, I think, months, and there would be.
And I'm like, wait, there's this and there's that. And
I know. There's such good. Well, we'll continue, but before we go any further, I just want to let the audience know that you guys have generously offered a wonderful gift. So I was going to have you talk about that a little bit, and then we'll see what anything left unsaid.
Yeah. So we're kind of pulling a few gifts together here. There's a meditation that Neil and I do together that really helps to like really sink in to what it is that you want, and then how to actually like move past your blocks and really step in.
Yeah, it's about, if I'm remembering right, it's about identifying your pain, and then how you transform that.
Exactly. Thank you. That was so much better said than what I just said. Clearer. Okay, so that's the meditation. And then we're also going to give you a little taste of the De Leon course that you've taken, and we're actually going to gift one of the days. So we'll have a video. It's about a 10-minute teaching video, some little nugget for the relationship.
Yeah. And it'll probably be one of the early on ones, because that's a 21-day course, as you know, Perry, that kind of builds on itself. But we want to make sure you have something useful, and it'll be a good starting point, like, especially if you're like, all right, wow, that all sounded really good. How do I integrate? Hopefully this would be a good way to at least take a step in that direction.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, thanks for offering that. And I will say, for everybody who's listening, I will attest to the power. Even some of the things I remember, they're like, wow, this is really simple, but they were profound. And to integrate them into my life, I'm like, yeah, you know what? maybe I even thought of this, or maybe I didn't, but actually doing it. So the course is excellent. And so thank you for offering that gift, and I highly recommend everybody check it out, whether you have the perfect relationship or not. Go for it. Yeah. So before we wrap up, I just want to ask you just one or two more questions that I really think are important to get out there. Ego, because ego plays such a huge part in relationships, you know, and I can only speak about men because, again, I'm a man, right. And I've heard so many stories from the men, how the ego plays in. And I listen to the guys like, well, she did this, and, you know, she, you know, and it's just coming from that place of ego where we know it doesn't work. It doesn't work when we're all in that ego place. So if you like to share what your wisdom is on the ego plane, that would be great.
Good question. Want to go?
Yeah.
I could feel that.
So many
revving up.
And
get out of your ego, Neil.
I got something to say. Well, Chloe, you touched on humility earlier.
Totally. Which is basically a huge
counterpoint to ego. One thing I like to remember is that for the most part, I think we humans are always doing the best we can in a given situation. And one of the core pieces for us in terms of like establishing safety earlier on in our relationship was recognizing that we actually weren't out to get each other. And so that kind of adversarial kind of ego that you were just talking about, Perry, that's what comes up for me, is to embody this sense of like, my partner is doing the best that they can right now. And if it's hurting me, then I can be, or if I'm experiencing pain as a result of what they're doing, then I can be honest about that. Like, that, ouch, that really hurts, or that doesn't feel good. Or I wish you would do it differently, or here's my request about how you might approach, you know, a complaint with me. So these are all like valid ways of acknowledging our, because getting rid of ego, if that's even possible, isn't about diminishing the importance of you as like a sovereign being, and your needs. But it's more about recognizing that you are in this dance together. And so if you've hit a point of pain, how do you remind yourself, okay, my partner's doing the best they can. That really hurt or came at me crosswise. What do I really want right now? Do I want to be right? Do I want to connect? Do I want my partner to just see how what just happened is really hurting, like how I'm hurting as a result, and give them an opportunity to repair? There's a lot of possibility and potency, like real power involved in being vulnerable in those moments. When you come forward with the force of your ego, it invites resistance, really.
Or defensiveness too.
Yeah, exactly. So if what you really want deep down is to connect and to experience the love that you're probably feeling disconnected from, which is why that is rearing up, then acknowledging that cycle is happening, like, oh, I'm defending because I feel hurt and I'm not important or whatever it is, and saying, oh, okay, that's just what happened. And now how do I turn towards like my vulnerability in this moment? How do I make whatever happens next about connecting? I think that's a nice, sweet antidote to the ways that ego wants to try and control and dominate a situation. And in the end, it runs counter to I think what we really want, which is to feel connected with our partners.
Yeah. And I would just say, I mean, I think a lot of what we've been talking about is really stepping out of the ego dynamic. And just to add to what you were saying, there's a way in which it feels like ego steps in as the protector from vulnerability, basically. It's like, if we're starting to feel vulnerable, or, ooh, that's hitting a place that I don't want to go, or that's too painful, or I don't want to look at that right now, or whatever, that's when ego is just like, all right, I'm in, and I'm gonna either fight to be right, I'm gonna fight to make someone else wrong. It's like really on that right wrong axis. There's a way it gets really ferocious to protect us, and in a way it's like, wow, thanks, and I actually need to transform that so I can be present in the moment and I can show up. And it really, to me in life, it's like, if you're choosing love, if you're choosing a relationship, if you want deep connection, like, you're going to have to kind of be willing to check that. And as I was saying, with the humility piece, it's like, it is me, like in that moment when I have to just be like, oh, I'm gonna like push through and make it. Okay, I'll own this. It's like me really, it's almost like I have to barrel through the protector ego and just be like, okay, I'm not gonna listen to the ego right now. Like, no, I can't be right now, because if I'm trying to be right, it breaks all connection. But if I go towards generosity, love, curiosity, like, why is my ego rearing its large, ferocious head right now? What am I actually trying to protect? What's the wound here? What's the vulnerability? And actually, if I out myself, I find if I out myself and I'm like, oh wow, I really want to just bite your head off right now, but in fact I'm feeling that pain from whatever time, or wow, I'm feeling some serious vulnerability here because I'm not sure you're actually showing up and present right now, and I really am feeling like I need that from you. Then it immediately brings in connection, love, closeness, instead of having the ego like there to protect and to get us to be the right person, or have the right thing, or the whatever it is that you're fighting for. If that makes sense.
Oh, it makes perfect sense. And I love that. Ego steps in as the protector of vulnerability. I mean, I couldn't have said it any better. That's perfect. It's like that old saying. It's like, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy?
Exactly.
Yeah. So you guys both have touched on some amazing, awesome points and made some really great suggestions.
Can I add something quickly there?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
My ego won't let me. No, one thing that you said that I think is, and you've mentioned it a couple times, that I just wanted to highlight, is the power of truth. And so if, let's just say, for instance, that I might have said that I was going to clean the dishes, and
this never happened,
and I didn't. And Chloe's like, dude, you said you were going to clean the dishes. So like ego might step in and say, well, I was really busy, and I was like, I took the dog out, and why won't you appreciate what I did do? Right? Like, so there's ego, right? There's such power in a moment like that to diffuse a situation, of being willing to say, you're right. I didn't do the dishes. And it can be really hard for ego to do that. But what it actually does is it not only helps acknowledge a partner who's like, if you get all defensive, they might be wondering, well, what's their problem? Like, the dishes clearly aren't done. So, again, creating disconnection. So it helps connect you to your partner. It also helps like dissolve some of that inner tension, to just be like, that's actually true, or there is an element of truth in what is going on right now. And by acknowledging that, I get to get past it, and instead of being in resistance to it.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you for adding that. That was a great point. Again, you guys have touched on some really, really important points and made some really great suggestions between the safety and the communication, being present, acknowledging each other. We touched upon gratitude, and also forgiveness is a really big part of it. So before we part, because we could keep talking, but then nobody's going to want to take your courses because you're giving it all away here for free. So before we go, ladies first, is there anything that either one of you like to share on parting words?
Yeah, actually, the thing that just keeps coming back and back and back in my head is flowing down. It came up especially with the talking about sexuality and trauma in particular, but any sort of sexuality, like allowing us, like really when we step in and we're like, oh, I can slow down here. I know that you can get on the arousal drive, and it can be like, you know, so intense. And it's like, actually, when we allow ourselves to slow down, or even in the moment in the kitchen with it's like, oh, my ego wants to step in here. I need to just slow down for a minute. You know, oh, we're in the bedroom, and, you know, the more I find that when we slow down, the more connected I feel, the more love I feel. It allows for my body to catch up with what's going on. It allows me to relax. It's like really, really transformative when there's trauma in the circuit. It basically like starts to rewire the body, the brain, to actually find new pathways of connection, which leads to growth, you know, and healing, and the trauma brain can just relax and the body can open, instead of like, if it's fast and it's intense, it's like, whoa, the body is immediately going into like tension, and it's not able, and you know, you're not able to really open or connect or go places you might not be able to go if you're going fast and kind of like not being fully present. So my parting words are slow down.
Yeah.
Neil, would you like to add to that?
Slowing way down.
Slow down.
We've covered so much ground.
Yeah, it's amazing
in this conversation, and I'm appreciative of your questions, and that you created like such beautiful space for us to have all of this, and really feeling grateful for that, Perry. And I think for you listening, perhaps there's a risk of being inspired. I don't know that that's a risk, but being overwhelmed perhaps with like all these things that we've talked about and what that could mean for your relationship. So I think the one thing that I would like to end with is this sense of, let yourself be inspired. I hope that's true for you. And choose one thing. Choose one thing that felt the lightest, or the most inspiring, or that had the most potential for whatever comes next for you, or even maybe the one thing that's the edgiest, and like, ooh, what would it be like to bring that up in my partnership, or to have my partner watch this section of the interview, whatever it is. Choose one thing and let that really integrate. And because this conversation isn't going anywhere, right? You'll be able to revisit it and choose a second thing later. But hopefully that one thing allows you to integrate and see how that ripples out into all of your other experience. This conversation is kept coming back in on itself over and over again. So that just shows you that, like you said, Chloe, you change one thing and the whole system changes. So allow yourself that possibility, and we'll be here for you after that one thing has done its work.
Excellent. Beautiful, beautiful. My heart is really happy. I really want to thank both of you for taking the time to be here and to share your stories and your wisdom and your suggestions with everybody, because you are a testament that love does work, and the new love paradigm is here to stay. So yeah, so again, thank you very much. And
thank you.
Yeah, this is beautiful. So everyone who's viewing, I really, really encourage you to click on the link that will accompany this video and download their beautiful offering, and look them up. You know, Neil's got his podcast, you know, Chloe's doing her shamanic work and the love work, and what's better than love? So really, so keep tuning in. You know, come on back, and we got other mindful experts that'll be sharing their wisdom. So until then, be well and walk your path in illumination and loving kindness. So, and I think before we leave, I think the three of us should just blow out a big kiss to everybody out there and spread out the love. So how about on three? 1, 2, 3. Mwah! All right, guys. Love you.
Love you.
Love you.